remember the last time I was here. It could be a year. What? Where did you see him? Was he having bacon and eggs?
All right, let's see what happens when we get to it.
No, but you're trying to figure out how to have breakfast.
Wow. Is he still working? I wondered when I was going to find out. I'm doing fine.
Well, Ray asked you.
I miss being here. You know, today I drove down. No traffic. It's an hour and a quarter. And the other thing is, I will not come to Miami on a weekday. The traffic, it's insanity. About a year and a half ago, I had to come down to meet somebody on Miami Beach, one of my college friends. I picked him up in Mount Sinai. It took us 2 hours. You know, with all the construction and the intersections, with this and with that.
And they moving the exit.
That's the thing. You feel great. Nothing hurts. That's what counts.
One second says.
Right. You know, you get to be our age. For some of us, what do? What's our sport? Go to doctors.
That's my avocation.
That's it.
Well, yeah,
Cookie and I keep a master calendar. We've got what appointments where. And what events we want to go to. And when we play couples gymnastics with other couples. Mostly I play with a bunch of guys. And it's fun.
All
I
right.
enjoy it. I like it.
35.
You're great. Can I tell you? All right, I'm going to sit and enjoy
Good Shabbos.
my bagel pops.
How we doing?
All right.
you stay after part of the game?
Yeah. Big win.
Very big win.
My daughter was at the game. Although she left early because they had their formal. So. All right, here we go. Shabbat Shalom to everyone at home. Susan, Cliff, anyone else who's listening? Good Shabbos. Here we go.
Are you going to the
To what?
AJC dinner either
When is it?
Thursday or Wednesday?
No, I can't. I have a thing here. But I was at the consular breakfast. All right, here we go. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat לעשות את השבת לדורותם בריתו ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם בריתו ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם אותי לעולם ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם וביום השביעי שבת וינפש שבת Vayinafash v'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם בורא בריאה גפן. Amen. L'chaim. Torah study blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. Okay, good Shabbos, everyone. Torah portion is called Vayishlach, and we are in chapter 35, verse 6. That's where we're going to start, where Jacob first enters into Canaan. Chapter 35, verse 6. Anyone have a page in Plout? 232 in Plout. Okay, so last week, if you remember, we dealt with Rachel and the Trophim. Remember the idols that she stole? We talked about what that represented. And today, there's another story about Rachel. It's actually her last story because she dies in this story. But it's a weird story. So let's just to go through. The 12 tribes of Israel are composed of 4 mothers, right? Leah, Rachel, Bilhah, and Zilpah. So of the 12 tribes who were produced by 4 mothers, if they were going to be equal, and if you can do this kind of math in your head, they would have 3 each. Right? So Leah has 3. First Reuben, then Simon, then Levi. And she thinks that she's done. But then she has Judah. And she names him Judah because she gives thanks to God because she thought it was a bonus. And it turns out that he's the one that we all come from today, Judah. That's why we're called Jews, because we're the people who give thanks. Right? And then Bilhah and Zilpah have 2 each. And then Leah comes and has 2 more, which means there's 10. And then Rachel finally gets pregnant and has Joseph. And what we saw last week was that when Joseph was born, right after Joseph was born in the next verse, Jacob says, okay, it's time to go back to Israel. And he had a vision, according to the rabbis, that the force of Jews that would be able to destroy the force of Esau was Joseph. That was his vision. And so they go back, and they get back, and now this is where we are now. They come back, and they go into the land of Israel, which at the time was called Canaan. And then it would be called Israel, and then Palestine, and then Israel again. Or as people who don't necessarily agree with what I say on social media write on my comments of my Instagram on a daily basis, Free Palestine. To which I respond, we did in 1948. You're good there. You can cross that off of the things that you have to worry about. We did already. Okay. Now, it had a negative name when they first, some of the cities weren't so great, and they were not winners. And that's where I want to start. So if you look at verse 6, these were not winning names. Right? Then Jacob came to Luz. And he said, well, what do you call these people? Losers. He says, this isn't going to work. This isn't going to work. So he said, so Jacob came into the land of Canaan. He saw a sign that said, this place, welcome to lose. He said, there's a bunch of losers. Changing the name. So I changed it to Bethel, which has like a nicer ring to it. Okay, so that's where we are. Everyone with me? So we just read verse 6, and now, Judy, would you mind? Is that on? Yes. Okay. Okay, so we're now verse 7. So all we've said so far, just to recap before we start, is that Jacob realized when Joseph was born that it was time to go back to Canaan. They come back to Canaan. They cross over into Canaan. That's where we are. Okay, here we go.
There he built an altar and named the site El Bethel, for it was there that God revealed himself to him when he was fleeing from his brother. Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died and was buried under the oak below Bethel, so it was named Alon Bakuth. God appeared again to Jacob on his arrival from Padan Aram, and he blessed him.
Okay, so now there's this woman named Deborah. This is not the same Deborah that you see later on in the Tanakh, who's the judge who sits under the tree and then is the judge and leads the army. That's a totally different Deborah. But you're allowed to be, sometimes you see this. There are a variety of different places where you see two people in the Tanakh with the same name. That happens. There are two Michals. It happens. Now, Rashi tells us, I didn't bring you this Rashi, but I just want to make an interesting point here. Rashi says that what is Deborah's matter in the household of Jacob? Why is she there? She was there because Rebekah had said to Jacob, then I will send and bring you from there. She sent Deborah to him to Padan Aram to tell him to depart from there. But she died on the way. And then Rashi says, I learned this from the words of Rabbi Moshe Hadarshan. So what's a good question? Who's Rabbi Moshe Hadarshan? So he was a rabbi from southern France, a place called Narbonne. And he was from the 1000s. Now, why is that interesting? Because why is Rashi interesting? Why is it that Rashi was the only rabbi from the end of the 10th century? He died in 1105. Why is he the only one who really has all of this information that gets passed on? Because most of the other, because of where he was geographically, and this may have been a miracle, but most of the other rabbis who had the same traditions and knew the same stuff that Rashi knew were wiped out in the Crusades, and all of their works were lost. And so there may have been other rabbis who wrote the same stuff or, the similar traditions and passed on a lot of the information that Rashi knew, but most of them were wiped out in the Crusades. And so what Rashi really is for us is that bridge that connects pre-Crusade information to post-Crusade information. He's the one complete source that survived from that period. Okay? Now, there weren't that many, because the majority of the major rabbis of that time, leading up in the 7th, 8th, 9th century, were all in Babylonia. And so they didn't have this European tradition that was passed on in the Ashkenazic world. But Rashi was one of the few who was there and wasn't wiped out. And so all the people who then studied Rashi became known as the school of students called the Tosafot. So if you ever looked at a page of Talmud, you have the main section in the middle, and then on one side you have Rashi, and what's on the other side? Tosafot. Who were Tosafot? Rashi's students. Okay, so just a little bit of history now you know. Okay. We're up to verse 9.
God appeared again to Jacob on his arrival from Padan Aram, and he blessed him. God said to him, You, whose name is Jacob, you shall be called Jacob no more, but Israel shall be your name. Thus he named him Israel. And God said to him, I am El Shaddai.
So do you see, any of you, the Devar Torah that I gave last week? I don't know if any of you caught it. It was fabulous. So we point out that one of the things that I did was point out that the name change of Jacob isn't perfect. The name change of Abraham and Sarah were perfect, because when they were named Abram and Sarai, and then God changed their names to Abraham and Sarah, the Torah never again calls them Abram and Sarai. They're Abraham and Sarah forever. Perfect change. But when Jacob's name is changed to Israel, he's sometimes still referred to as Jacob. And sometimes he's referred to as Israel. And here he's Israel. Why? Because he crossed into the land of Israel. But what the name Israel represents is your home. Jacob, when he's called Jacob, means you have with you the memories that you suffered when you were in the diaspora. Right. And we, the Jewish people, who for the last 2,000 years have been persecuted, and one of the things I pointed out in the Devar Torah was that October 7th was different than the wars of the last maybe 20 years with Gaza. There have been a variety of skirmishes with Gaza, but never to the point where it was anything like October 7th. Because those other wars were Israel wars. But October 7th reminded us not of Israel, reminded us of the Holocaust. Right? So, because we still have those scars too. We're not over that yet either. In fact, you're never over that. How do you know that? How does Jacob, what's the sign that Jacob will never be over the diaspora? The limp. Right? Remember, he injures his, the reason why his hip is injured, it's not just sciatica from like turning 50. That's my issue. But for Jacob, the limp was meant to show that he still had the scars from the diaspora. And when he's in that mode, the scars from the diaspora, all the horrible things that happened to him, he's Jacob. When he's in Israel and he's thinking about Herzl and Zionism, he's Israel. Okay, that was the whole sermon. So you don't have to go back and watch it, which you wouldn't have anyway. Okay, now we still have a lot to get to. This is all bonus material. Okay, where are we up to?
11.
11, okay.
And God said to him, I am El Shaddai, be fertile and increase. A nation, yea, an assembly of nations shall descend from you. Kings shall issue from your loins. The land that I gave to Abraham and Isaac I give to you, and to your offspring to come. I will give the land. God parted from him at that spot where he had spoken to him, and Jacob set up a pillar at the site where he had spoken to him, a pillar of stone, and he offered a libation on it and poured oil upon it. Jacob gave the site where God had spoken to him the name of Bethel.
Okay, so there's a lot of pillars being set up and a lot of oil being poured, and what's the point of all of that? Well, that's what I'm going to explain at the Conservative Minyan at 10 o'clock, at 10:30. But what I used to do was whatever I would teach here, I would then go to the Conservative Minyan and say it again, because nobody from that minyan came to this. But now what's happened is a few of them have started coming. So now I have to prepare 2 different tracks. But don't worry. You've got the oil and the altars. But I got something else for you here. Okay, so now we're up to... Okay, so now it's going to get interesting. How did we start? We started off by saying you could go to Israel once Joseph is born. Now you're in Israel. Who's going to be born?
Benjamin.
Benjamin. which means that Benjamin's the only one of the tribes that's actually born in the land of Israel. You see the difference? Okay, so let's keep going. But the way he's born here and what happens to Rachel is thoroughly bizarre. And that's what I want to try to figure out today. Okay, let's keep going. Verse 16.
They set out from Bethel, but when they were still some distance short of Ephrath, Rachel was in childbirth, and she had hard labor.
Okay, so anybody know where Ephrath is? Any Riskin fans? Yeah. I know Paul loves Riskin. Where's Ephrath? Ephrath is... Ephrath is the West Bank. But it's the West Bank that's like adjacent to Jerusalem. Have you ever heard of Gush Etzion? It's the main city in Gush Etzion. It's mostly Orthodox. People live there, considered settlers. But it's a suburb of Jerusalem, but considered the West Bank. And there's some great yeshivas there, some very well-known yeshivas. And if you want to live in Jerusalem and you can't afford to live in Jerusalem, you can move to Ephrath. It's actually a very beautiful place. So what I'm telling you, though, is, I don't know if any of you have ever been there, but Kever Rachel, the grave of Rachel, is on the border of Jerusalem. Okay, and that's where we are right now. Okay, so she gives birth, and she has difficulty in childbirth. That's verse 16. Now verse 17.
When her labor was at its hardest, the midwife said to her, "Have no fear, for it is another boy for you."
Right, so, you're in tremendous pain. This is before epidural. She's in tremendous pain. And, to the point that she's dying. But the nurse says, "Don't worry. Who cares you're going to die? It's a boy." Imagine if it were a girl. Oy, you're going to die for nothing. That's what this verse is saying. Oh, don't worry. Don't worry you're dying. It's a boy. Oy vey, what a thing to say. Okay, but that's what just happened in verse 17. Have no fear, for this is a son. Verse 18 is one of the most dramatic verses in the Torah. Okay, verse 18.
But as she breathed her last, for she was dying, she named him Ben-Oni, but his father called him Benjamin.
Right. Interesting that she dies in a verse that is number 18. 18 is chai. 18 is life, but she just died. See, it's interesting. Okay? Now look what happens. Her last dying wish is to name this son Ben-Oni, who is, I think, a Jedi. Right? Ben-Oni was, I think, the original Jedi. Right? In, I don't know, episode 4, episode 5. Ben-Oni won Kanoni or something. Right? Oni from Kanoni, whatever. Guys, I'll be here all week. If you didn't get... Now look what happens. Her dying wish, I'm going to name him Ben-Oni. And just as he dies, Benjamin says, "Oh, that's your dying wish?" Jacob says, "That's your dying wish?" I don't think so. Let's go with Benjamin. I always wanted to call him Benjamin. Look what just... Okay, do you see this? For she died, she called his name Ben-Oni, but his father called him Benjamin. And obviously we know that that's the one they went with, right? Everyone calls him Benjamin. No one calls him Ben-Oni. Rachel died and was buried on the road to Ephrath, which is Bethlehem. And Jacob set up a monument over her grave. It is the monument of Rachel's grave until today. Okay, and that's it. That's all I wanted to deal with for today and try to figure out what just happened. Now, if any of you have ever been... I'm trying to think where we did this. If you've ever been to the Ir David, the city of David in Jerusalem, where you can see where King David's old palace was, there's a lookout. In a certain area, there's a lookout. And if you're standing on the top of the lookout, there's a big valley. And you see the valley. And then the other side of the valley is Bethlehem. And so if you have a good guide, he'll point that out. Or she'll point that out. And you'll say, okay. And you'll say, what do I care? But then you'll say, think about it. Where you're standing in Ir David, in the city of David, is the water shaft that David went through, underground, through the water shaft, to come up and conquer Jerusalem. And it's right there in that valley. You say, okay, so that's where the water shaft is. And you can go and see, it's called Warren's Shaft. You can go and see that. Why? Because Warren was the archaeologist who found it. It's fascinating. You can go there and you go under and you can see the shaft that King David and his troops came through to conquer the Jebusites 3,000 years ago. So you ask the question, well, why is that the way they came through? And why does David know that area so well? Because David's from Bethlehem. And that valley was Bethlehem. And what did David do? He was a shepherd. He knew every nook and cranny and every rock and every water shaft and everything. And that's what he was doing his whole life. And then it just so happened that that was the same route that was needed to conquer Jerusalem. It was pretty neat. Pretty neat idea. So that's where they are, though. This is, we're right on the border of Jerusalem, Beit Lechem, Ephrat, etc. And now Rachel is going to die. So I pointed out last week, and I just want to run through this idea very quickly and then move on to something else. Deal with the name change. Because there's a lot going on here with the name change. But according to Torah law, you're not allowed to marry two sisters who are both living. If you're married to a sister and she dies, then you can marry the sister. But if they're both alive, you're not allowed to marry two sisters. That's in the Torah, but we don't have it yet. It's going to come later in the Torah. But we know that the forefathers and the foremothers knew the mitzvahs because they were prophets. And so Jacob should have known better than to marry two sisters. Okay, he was deceived, but okay, so tough luck. You're stuck with Leah. But no, he ends up marrying Rachel while Leah's still alive. So how can he get away with that? He's supposed to be following the mitzvahs. And the answer is, Ramban mentions this in his commentary on the Torah in chapter 48. I believe it's verse 7. He has a whole long comment there. But what he says there is, the rules for this rule for keeping the mitzvahs before the Torah was given only held for the land of Israel. And since Jacob was married to the two sisters outside the land of Israel, it was okay. But now that they've come back to the border, the marriage that never should have happened, the one to Rachel, the land can't deal with it. And so she dies right away. You don't have to believe that. I don't care if you believe that. That's just what Ramban says, and it's an idea that a lot of rabbis hold. If you like it, great. If you don't, you can be wrong. I don't care. I don't know, but okay. No, it doesn't matter. You can take it or leave it, but it's just one idea that Nachmanides had. But what I want to really talk about, though, is why the name change. And doesn't that seem a little insensitive to deny Rachel's last wish as she's dying and say, oh, my final words to you are, yeah, we're not going to go with that name. I got a better one. That's crazy. Okay, now, first of all, what do the names mean? What is Ben-Oni and what is Binyamin? So according to Rashi, his first source on the sheet, Bernie, would you mind reading that? Do you have the first source? Ben-Oni means?
Ben-Oni means son of my sorrow, Genesis Rabbah.
Right, so Oni here, which is mentioned. Now, remember, this is Oni with an aleph, not an ayin. Oni with an ayin means something totally different. Oni with an ayin means poor. Right? What's the... so, it's mentioned in the Haggadah a couple times. You see that word. Oni means poor. But with an aleph, there's an expression in modern Hebrew, chaser onim. Anyone ever heard that word? Okay, but it can also mean sorrow. And what Rachel is saying is, this is a terrible moment for me. I'm never going to get to know this baby. I'm about to die. So this is the son of my sorrow. And Jacob says, we're not going with that. Let's go instead with Benjamin. Well, what does Benjamin mean? Okay, Rashi. Bernita?
I am of opinion that he was so called because he alone was born in the land of Canaan, which is in the south. As one comes from Aram Naharim, as it is said, in the south, in the land of Canaan, and going on still towards the south, therefore means where, has the same meaning as in the north and the south. Thou hast created them.
Now, north usually, Yamin, you might say, Yamin often means east, but the rabbis explained that this is, if you're facing east, then Yamin is south. And that's the direction that they were facing at the time. But what Jacob is really saying here is, instead of naming him the son of my sorrow, we're going to name him after the fact that he was the one that was born in Israel. And we're going to give him a name that represents geography. And that's Jacob's change. And maybe he thought, Rachel will appreciate it, even though it was the land of Israel that killed her. Maybe she'll appreciate that. So who's right and who's wrong? Well, Nachmanides, the Ramban. If you look at the next source, Annabella, would you mind reading the Ramban?
The correct interpretation appears to me to be that his mother called him Ben Oni, and she meant to say the son of my mourning, similar to, in expression to bread of onim, mourners. I have not eaten thereof be'oni, in my mourning. And his father understood the word oni in the sense of my strength, similar in expression to the first fruits of oni, my strength.
So, oni can mean two things. It can mean sorrow, but it can also mean strength. So there's this expression, chaser onim, in modern Hebrew. Chaser means lack of. And so, chaser onim generally means
Helpless.
helpless. I mean, it's usually translated in modern Hebrew as helpless. Okay, and therefore, Annabella, therefore.
And therefore he called him Binyamin, the son of power, or the son of strength. For in the right hand, Yamin, there is strength and success, just as it is written, a wise man's understanding is at his right hand. Thy right hand shall overtake all those that hate thee. The right hand of the Eternal is exalted. Jacob wanted to call him by the name his mother had called him, for all his children were called by the names their mothers had called them. And he thus rendered it to good and to strength.
Okay, so if you know how to say right and left in Hebrew, Yamin is right, small is left, right? Bibi, Yamin, right? And small, which is like a dirty word now. There's no more left in Israel. There's now right and center. Okay. So the reason, though, for saying right is what Nachmanides is adding here is it's not necessarily geographic, but that Yamin, in biblical terminology, the right hand is considered the stronger hand. So right means strong. Okay? They never imagined in the biblical era. They never imagined the value of relief pitchers. Like they never knew what it would be like to have a good lefty come out of the bullpen in the 8th inning. They never considered that. Okay. You ever heard of baseball? No? Okay. Okay, second paragraph.
Now I've seen in Bereshith
Rabbah, which means the midrash on the book of Genesis.
Ben-Oni, the son of my sorrow, and his father called him Benjamin in the sacred language. I do not know what this means, for it is all the sacred language, and so are the names of all the sons in the sacred language. However, the rabbis have alluded to that which I have said, namely, that Jacob rendered the expressions so that it signified good.
Okay, so there's an idea in the Midrash that Nachmanides doesn't quite understand, which means that Jacob wanted it to sound more Hebrew. And Benjamin sounds more Hebrew than Ben-Oni, to which Nachmanides says, not really, Ben-Oni's Hebrew too, I don't really get that. So what he says is, I think what that means, right, if you look at the last line of Nachmanides, that Jacob rendered the expression so that it signified good, which I guess means making it more Jewish, more Hebrew. So he said, I'm making it more positive. Now, consider that it's not like you change it from, Binyamin sounds a lot like Benoni. It's not like they're so different. It's not like you changed it from, I heard one rabbi explain it this week, he said, it's not like you changed it from Ben-Oni to Frank. Or Morris. Ben-Oni to Binyamin, they sound pretty similar. So he kept, Rachel's idea, but made it just a little bit more positive. That's what he adds there. Now, Rashbam, who was a grammarian and was the grandson of Rashi, adds a comment at the bottom here. He says, son of my old age, Zekunim, son of a long time, Yamim. In other words, Binyamin means Ben. Now, you know how to say days, like Yom Kippur? Yom is day. The plural of days is Yamim. Yamim means days. But this is not Yamim, this is Yamin, with an N at the end. But what Rashbam points out is that in Hebrew, sometimes the Mem and the Nun are interchangeable. And Yamin can also mean days. And you see that a lot in the Tanakh. So what he's saying is, no, what Jacob really meant was I changed. So we have three ideas. One is, he named him geographically. Yamin means the east. And he's the one who was born here in the land of Israel. That's option one for the name change. Option two is, Yamin means the right hand, which is strength. And I want this son to show the strength of the Jewish people. We're home. That's option two. Option three is Benjamin, the son of my days. I had him. He was my last one when I was the oldest. So we just have three different options for why Jacob might have changed the name to Benjamin. Okay, clear so far? Okay. Now, look what happens when she dies. The first thing that Jacob does after she dies, let's see, verse 14. Shelley, would you mind reading in the Torah, verse 14?
And Jacob set up a pillar at the site where he had spoken to him, a pillar of stone, and he offered a libation on it and poured oil upon it.
Okay, so he set up a stone. And by the way, when we do unveilings, I think we mentioned this last week, but when we do unveilings, we read this verse. This is the first ever unveiling. This is the reason why we have unveilings. This is the setting up this idea that when someone passes away, you put a marker so that people know who's there. Okay? Question, why do we do that? That's next service. That's my Devar Torah for the next service. And it's a fantastic idea. All right. Now, here's... Oh, this is a different stone he sets up. Hold on. Yeah, he sets up a lot of stones. Okay, 19 she dies. So 20. Jacob set up a monument over her grave in the monument of Rachel's grave until today. Okay, so yeah, he sets up a lot of pillars. That's what I'm going to talk about. Okay, so sorry. The one that he does after she dies, the monument for her grave, is verse 20. And by the way, lots of Jews still go there today. In fact, a lot of women go there when they want to get pregnant. They go pray. It's a very common thing to go pray at the grave of Rachel. Kever Rachel. It's also a very dangerous place. It's surrounded by these huge walls because the Palestinians attack it a lot. And they were throwing stuff and rocks and stuff, so they put up these huge walls so that they can't throw rocks over them. And it's a very, very secure place. But it's also an interesting place. It's Bethlehem. Yeah, it's in a Palestinian town. Very dangerous place to be, unfortunately. Now, what I want to just show you here is the funeral service for the funeral service for Rachel is a little bit different than the funeral service for Rachel and Rebekah. Okay? Now, if you notice, all of the four mothers die before their husbands. Sarah dies before Abraham, Rebekah dies before Isaac, and Leah and Rachel both die before Jacob. Have you ever noticed that? Yeah. You're like, I noticed, but who cares? Now, we don't know a lot about the funeral services. In fact, for Leah's death isn't mentioned at all in the Torah. But it is mentioned, Jacob does say at the end of Genesis that he wants to be buried where Leah is buried. So we know that she dies first, but there's no verse that says, and she died. However, for Rebekah and Sarah, there are such verses. And if you look now on the top of the back of the sheet, I want to show you the verse when Sarah dies. So, 23:2. Bill, would you mind reading that one? Sarah died.
Sarah died in Kiriath Arba, now Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham proceeded to mourn for Sarah and to bewail her. Okay, now bewail her, that's the translation that I brought here, but let me just look it up and tell you what it is in Hebrew, because it really doesn't do it justice in English. Exactly. So in verse, it says, Vatamat Sarah died, in Kiryat Arba. He Hebron, which is Hebron, which is also in the West Bank, which is also a very dangerous place. Be'eretz Canaan, the land of Canaan. Vayavo Abraham came, lispod. Now, does anyone know, besides Paul, what is a hesped? And Annabella, I know you know. Well, what's a hesped? A hesped is a eulogy. Lispod is to eulogize. I don't know, it translated here to bewail her, which is fine, but what it really means is to give a eulogy. And what I want to point out is that when Sarah dies, Abraham gives a eulogy. When Rachel dies, he sets up a stone, but there's no eulogy. So there's differences. With Abraham, there's no stone. Why? Because he buries her deep in a cave. And the cave really in and of itself is the stone. And Sarah's not the first of famous people to be buried there, in the cave of Machpelah in Hebron. Why is it already a famous place? Who's already buried there? Sarah. Very good. Adam and Eve. But before Sarah. Adam and Eve are buried there. So it's already a tourist trap. Right? You can already see birthright groups there, you know. Okay, now, so what did Isaac do so now I've shown you what Abraham did at Sarah's funeral and what Jacob did at Rachel's funeral. Now I ask the question, what did Isaac do at Rebekah's funeral? And the answer is, he didn't even go. Why? The game was on. You know, it was Ohio State, Michigan, and, you know. All right, no. Why didn't he go? Why didn't Isaac go to Rebekah's funeral? Okay, so if you look now at Nachmanides on 35:8. I didn't. It should say Nachmanides on Genesis 35:8. I left out the Genesis. But look what it says here. I found a similar explanation in Ela Dvarim Rabbah, which means Deuteronomy. In the Midrash on Deuteronomy, in the section of Kiteitzei LeMilchama, when the sages say, you find that when Rebekah died, people said, who shall go before her? Meaning, who's going to lead the processional when Rebekah dies? We've got a real problem. Why? Because Abraham's dead, and Isaac is too sick to go. He's confined to the house, and his eyes are dim. He's not physically able to do anything. By the time that Rebekah dies, Isaac is too sick to get out of bed, and he doesn't go to the funeral. Jacob is not around. He's in Padan Aram. And the only one around who could do it, right, because Jacob was afraid to be in town because Esau would kill him. And the only family member left is Esau, and we can't have him. Now, Esau's her son, but he's so wicked that we said, look, if he's the only one who's going to show up to the funeral, that's going to look terrible for her. So what they do, they took her beer at night, and they did like a secret funeral with no eulogies. So what we say is, Sarah had a eulogy. Rebekah should have had a eulogy, but it didn't work out because of all these bizarre circumstances. And now we get to Rachel, and she doesn't have a eulogy, and it's a little bizarre. Okay, so now let's point out there is a reason why when we think of Rachel is sort of a sad life, right? Things don't really work out for her. What are the things that are sad for her? Well, her dad cheats her. She doesn't get to marry Jacob for real, halachically. And, she has all these, tension now with Leah. She can't get pregnant for a long, long time. When she finally does, they go out on the road and start traveling. And when she finally gets to where she wants to go, she dies. And so her life is a lot of trauma. It's a very difficult life for Rachel. And probably with a lot of tears. And to a certain extent, she represents tears, but she did in the end ultimately make it to Israel. Okay? And there is a lot of symbolism with Rachel and the Jewish people. Meaning we also have a lot of tears and get kicked out, but we're also hopefully ultimately going to make it back. Now, why is Rachel not buried? Why does Jacob say... Remember, Jacob made a big deal about dying. Remember where Jacob died? Died in Egypt. And he made them promise to bury me in Israel. Meaning, I don't mind, once I'm dead, schlepping a great deal to get to the cave of Machpelah in Hebron. Now here's Rachel who dies, and instead of just schlepping her a little bit, he buries her right there by the side of the road. But for me, I want you to take me all the way to this foreign country, to a whole different country, and bury me specifically in that cave, because that's where all the other forefathers and foremothers are. But Rachel, the one I love the most, that cave's just down the road, but let's bury her here by the side of the road instead. Isn't that weird? And when you go to the cave of Machpelah, you can see Abraham's grave and Sarah's grave and Rebekah's grave and Isaac's grave and Jacob's grave and Leah's grave. Oh, you want to see Rachel? She's by the side of the road. That's weird. Unless Jacob had a vision that there was a reason to do that. Because he was the one he was the one that he loved the most. He would want to be buried with her. I heard someone recently around here. I think it was their wife was buried at Mount Nebo in the mausoleum, and above them was above his wife or I forget, I don't know, it was one of the two. One of them died and was buried in the mausoleum, and the other spouse saw above them a name and a blank. And she saw the name and she said, that's who, when I die, I'm going to be buried right here next to my husband, and this guy's right on top of me. He's dead, but the other one I see is not filled yet. So she found out who this woman was who was going to be buried on top of her and called her for a meal. She said, I really wanted to meet you. Why? She said, because we're going to be together for a long time. And they actually got together. And so, okay, you know. After the meal, she decided to have her... No, I don't know. Wouldn't Jacob want to be buried next to Rachel? So there must have been a reason why he didn't. Well, here it is. Look at Rashi. Now remember, Rachel's the one who cries and is sad. Okay? I mean, she has a sad life and she cries, and she's crying at the end of her life. So who are we up to? All right, Hillary, would you mind reading the Rashi on Genesis 29:25?
And it came to pass that in the morning, behold, it was Leah, but at night it was not Leah. That is, he failed to recognize that it was Leah, because Jacob had given Rachel certain secret signs by which they could all, at all times, recognize one another. And when Rachel saw they were about to bring Leah to him for the marriage ceremony, she thought, my sister may now be put to shame. And she therefore readily transmitted these signs to her.
Right, so Rashi, according to the Talmud, is saying Rachel was in on it. When Laban tricked Jacob and made Leah the first wife, Rachel was in on it. I mean, how could she not have been? How could you pull it off? If she was supposed to be there, wouldn't she say, when they said, does anyone object, wouldn't she say, wait a minute? You know, by the way, we don't do that in Jewish, so we don't do the object. If you object, you can go to hell. We're having this wedding. You know, we don't do that. You know, but she had to have been in on it, right? So she did because she didn't want Leah to be embarrassed. And what Jacob said was, I know that your father's going to try to trick me. I know him. So I'm going to give you these little, henna tattoo things to put on your hand so I know that it's you. And then Jacob got under the chuppah and he saw the signs, but Rachel had taken them off of her hand and gave them to Leah because she was in on it because she didn't want to. But she was sad about it. This was a terrible thing that she had to do. So now, what good is her sadness and her crying? What does her sadness and her crying have to do with the side of the road? Okay, so now you look at the last Rashi on the sheet. Sherry, would you mind reading that one? And I buried her there.
And I buried her there and did not carry her even the short distance to Bethlehem to bring her into a city. I know that in your heart you feel some resentment against me. Know, however, that I buried her there by the command of God. And the future...
So you see that? I buried her there, what we say, al pi dibor. I buried her there because God told me to. I didn't want to bury her. I wanted to bury her in Hebron with the rest of us. But God told me there was a reason I had to bury her here. Okay, that's what we just said. Okay, let's keep going.
And the future proved that God had commanded him to do this in order that she might help her children when Nebuzaradan would take them into captivity. For when they were passing along that road, Rachel came forth from her grave and stood by her tomb weeping and beseeching mercy for them, as it is said in Jeremiah, a voice is heard in Ramah, the sound of weeping, Rachel weeping for her children.
Okay, so this is according to Jeremiah, that when the Jewish people were exiled after the first temple was destroyed in Babylon, and by the way, Jeremiah was there. Jeremiah was part of the exile that was sent out to Babylonia in the first captivity. When the first temple was destroyed by the Babylonians, the Jews who were sent to Babylonia as slaves walked on this road right by Rachel's tomb. And what did they see? A vision of Rachel crying, but saying, I too cried in the diaspora, but I made it back. And you are going to now cry in the diaspora, but you will also make it back. And when they came back, she came out again to welcome them. But they had to see this vision of her crying to know that they would come back. And that's why she had to be buried there, according to Rashi. Okay. That's a very famous story. I mean, that's a very famous Rashi. But now let me answer one more question. Why didn't Jacob offer Rachel a eulogy? He should have known from the tradition that when Abraham offered a eulogy for Sarah, that's how it's supposed to be done. And that when, Rebecca didn't get one, but that was, Isaac would have, but he was too sick. Maybe he texted something, but he didn't show up to do it. And so this is just one idea that I've heard and tried to formulate. And you can take it or leave it, but this is what I think what happened. Rachel's name change, Rachel's name of Benjamin, Ben-Oni, my suffering, that I'm the one who suffers, and that's what I represent, that name was honored by Jacob. How was that name honored by Jacob? By burying her right there. Your suffering is going to represent the Jewish people, but it's also going to give the Jewish people hope. And so I'm honoring your name that you're giving, Ben-Oni, your suffering, right here. Why right here? Because you named him Ben-Oni, the son of my suffering. This is the exact spot where he was born. You're going to be buried in the spot Ben, where your son was born. And it's become a very hallowed and holy place for the Jewish people. Jews go there all the time to pray, even to this day. I mean, think about it. To this day, people go to that spot to pray. And now there's a whole big thing built there and a whole big building and so forth. Her name, though, so then, but then Jacob goes one step further. He's saying, I'm going to name him I'm going to bury you here to honor the name Ben-Oni, your suffering. But like Nachmanides said, I'm going to try to turn this into something positive as well. It's not just going to be, I don't want you, Rachel, to just be a negative connotation going forward for the Jewish people. So he says, instead of Ben-Oni, we're going to just change the sound a little bit from Ben-Oni to Binyamin, which Nachmanides also says changes it from a negative connotation to a positive connotation. So let me say it this way. Rachel's name focuses on her death and her suffering. And that's what a funeral is. Funeral is about death, and it's suffering. It's very painful to be at a funeral. That's the name that Rachel gives. And that's what happens at her funeral. She's dead and they suffer. Jacob's name focuses on life, future, and blessings. The Jewish people in the land of Israel. He's the one who's here. He's the one who's strong. He's the future of the Jewish people. And by the way, the tribe Benjamin survives. There are only 3 tribes that survive. Benjamin, Levi, and Judah. But Benjamin was really small and got folded into Judah because they were also in the south, in Judah. And so Benjamin got folded in to Judah. And Levi, anyone who's a Levite or a Kohen, you come from Levi. But everyone else comes from Judah, which includes Benjamin. All the other tribes got lost. But Rachel's Benjamin survives. So think about it. She gives the baby a name. She gives the baby a name that has to do with loss and suffering. And he gives a name that has to do with memory and blessing. Well, what is something that when you take something that is about loss and suffering and turn it into memory and blessing, that's the definition of a eulogy. The name change in and of itself was the eulogy. See what she did? See what he did? He took her suffering and her mourning and he turned it into a blessing for the future of the Jewish people. And that's what a eulogy is supposed to be. This person died, and we are suffering that loss. But now let's turn the loss of that person into memory that should be for a blessing. And that's why we always say that. May your memory be for a blessing. So what happened was the name change was in and of itself the eulogy. Okay, Shabbat Shalom.
Very interesting. Yes, it was. About the pillar and Right. Correct. I've never understood why you say the memory should be for a blessing rather than the memory is a blessing. I've never understood that grammatically. I don't know that. Maybe you know the answer. Why did you say the memory should be for a blessing rather than the memory is a blessing? Maybe that's it. Because grammatically it doesn't make sense. No, I just did the again. He told the story about Rachel and the pillar. When he did the adorn for my dad. Yeah. Yes, actually.
I know, they're neighbors. Stuart. I know that.
All right. See you later.
Well, no, I used to give, whatever I did here, I did the same thing. But now I did something different because I was doing the same thing twice. You always hear it. This was it. You heard it. Oh, the minion people. Oh, they should come to Torah Study. But, yeah, that's Jamie's thing. But we're going to start mixing it up. We just hired 2 new rabbis with Robin Fisher. But we hired another rabbi that's going to start in July. We hired a new cantor, new senior cantor. Yeah. It's going to start February 1st. And it's a coup. He is coming from the largest Reform synagogue in the country. So it's a big, famous. His name is Michael. Everything's going to be reshuffled. Shabbat Shalom.